Welcome to the moment when history itself seemed to hold its breath. December 1944. Bastogne, Belgium, snow falling thick and heavy, the forest muffling the distant rumble of artillery fire. German armored columns moved relentlessly, engines growling, treads grinding over frozen mud, officers shouting orders into the bitter wind. Every movement calculated, every glance tense, every heartbeat synchronized with the pulse of a war that had already devoured millions. Yet none of the hardened Wehrmacht commanders, none of the SS battalion leaders had the slightest inkling that what they thought was an exposed, vulnerable line would be turned into an impenetrable fortress, that the invisible hand guiding the survival of a single critical witness would be the undoing of meticulously laid plans. They never expected the covert escort, never imagined that a handful of carefully positioned Americans blending into the blizzard and the chaos moving silently undetected, armed with nothing but precise knowledge and unyielding courage, could manipulate the battlefield itself. The snow hiding their steps, the trees masking their presence, the wind carrying their whispers away. Yet every German scout, every patrol, every reconnaissance aircraft scouring the woods missed the shadows slipping between the jagged ridges and shattered hedgerows. They could not see what did not want to be seen. They could not anticipate that this escort, this small, seemingly insignificant team, was orchestrating a masterstroke with consequences that would echo far beyond the Ardennes. They had no idea that the testimony they sought, the intelligence they thought they could bury, along with time and fear, would emerge from the frost and the darkened woods like a hammer striking history. Welcome to Bastogne. December 1944. Snowstorm, heavy artillery cracks resonating over frozen trees, American units slipping silently into position. Every man knowing that failure meant death, not just for themselves, but for the secret they protected. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening. Share your pulse, your sense of being there in the forest, in the chaos, the biting cold, seeping through the thin fabric of your imagination. Can you feel the crunch of snow under boots? You cannot see the metallic tang of fear and adrenaline in the air, the breath of men barely tolerated by frost, and the inevitability of bullets whistling past. The Germans never imagined that a single covert convoy, shielded by nothing more than strategy, cunning, and raw determination, could not only survive but manipulate the outcome of their assault. Yet here they were, ghosts in the snow, whispers in the wind, moving between artillery volleys, unseen, unstoppable. The testimony had to be delivered, and every step was a gamble with fate itself. Each foxhole, each ridge, each shadowed hollow could conceal disaster, yet the Americans pressed forward. They moved as one, coordinated by signals inaudible to the enemy eyes, scanning every tree line, every ruined farmhouse, every frozen pond for signs of German advance. And all the while the snow continued to fall, blanketing the earth, masking their presence, making the forest a living cloak of protection. They had to move fast, precise, ruthless in timing, each minute ticking closer to the moment when their quarry, this vital witness, would have to be extracted. The Germans patrolled, yet they saw nothing. The Americans' ingenuity turned terrain into weapon, weather into ally. A minor diversion here, a smoke grenade there, and entire battalions were misled, chasing shadows while the convoy moved steadily toward its destination, oblivious to the peril surrounding them. Every frozen creek crossed, every shattered wall, past every silhouette avoided, brought them closer to victory and closer to disaster simultaneously. Welcome to the edge where history teeters, where a handful of men, unseen, uncounted, and underestimated, could dictate the fate of an entire campaign. Bastogne, December 1944. The snow falling relentlessly, artillery crackling, German armor grinding, and in the midst of it all, the covert escort. They moved silent, lethal, almost mythical in their efficiency, unseen by those who considered themselves masters of the battlefield, yet destined to alter it irrevocably. Every step, every decision, every breath counted. The Germans thought they held control. They did not. Shadows were moving, whispers were passing, and the testimony, the key to understanding and turning the tide, was protected at all costs. The stakes were absolute. Failure was annihilation. Success was history itself. And here in this frozen, war-torn forest, You are witnessing the prelude to a maneuver so audacious, so improbable, that even decades later it reads like legend. The story begins before the first shot hits, before the first patrol notices the absence of what they thought inevitable. The Americans were everywhere and nowhere. The Germans would soon realize the price of underestimating ghosts. And this is where we begin. The Covert Escort moves, the snowfall's history waits, and your pulse races in time with every heartbeat, every footstep, every silent whisper of men walking between bullets and destiny. December 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The Ardennes forests blanketed in snow so thick it muffled the distant roar of artillery and the occasional rattle of German machine guns. Frost-laden branches sagged under the weight of ice each step through the woods, sending a crunch across a world that seemed frozen in time. The American units were spread thin, bivouacked in ruined farmhouses, foxholes dug into the frozen earth. Their breath visible in the cold air, rifles clutched tightly, eyes scanning the shadows for movement. Smoke from chimneys mingled with gunpowder scent, creating a haze that made shapes blur, and yet every soldier knew every creak of timber, every snapped branch could signal death. The Germans had pushed hard through the Ardennes, confident, calculating armored divisions rolling over the roads, their confidence built on intelligence that underestimated both terrain and the tenacity of those defending it. Snow clogged the tracks of tanks, slowing the columns. Engines groaning, but morale seemed unshakable on their side. They believed they had Bastogne encircled, that no reinforcements could slip through, that any escort or protective detail would be annihilated before delivering the witness. The Americans, by contrast, were acutely aware of their disadvantages. Units scattered, outnumbered, fatigued. The wind cut through wool uniforms, icy fingers reaching through layers, chilling men to the bone. Rations were meager ammunition, precious yet discipline held. Commanders whispered orders in low tones, the slightest sound carried across frozen fields, yet signals were passed silently, by gestures, by the faint light glinting off snow, by runners weaving through perilous paths. They knew the terrain intimately, the frozen creeks, the ruined barns, the slopes of hills that could conceal or betray movement. Every inch of the forest became a potential ally or an enemy. German forces pressed relentlessly, confident in their numerical advantage. Reconnaissance planes scanned the woods from above, spotting smoke plumes, listening for movement. Yet the Americans had learned to blend, to vanish in plain sight. Minor snowstorms were magnified into strategic cover, the falling flakes masking footsteps, muffling whispers, turning the forest into a living cloak that could conceal a single man or an entire squad. In the distance, artillery fire cracked like whips against the cold air, tracer rounds flashing over treetops, creating an eerie dance of light and shadow that kept soldiers' nerves taut. Every decision mattered. Advance too quickly and risk exposure. Wait too long, and the witness could be captured or killed. Within the town itself, civilians huddled in basements and cellars, their faces etched with fear. Yet there was determination in the eyes of some who knew the Americans' presence could mean the difference between life and death. Ruined streets were lined with abandoned vehicles. Barricades hastily erected snowdrifts, forming natural obstacles that the Germans did not anticipate. Courtyards became strategic points, and windows shattered or intact were vantage spots for snipers or lookouts. Every ruined wall, every collapsed roof contributed to a maze that the Germans had to navigate blindly. American forces had to make use of every advantage. An overturned cart could hide a man lying in wait. A broken fence could guide movement unseen. Even the angle of the sun through the frost-coated trees could provide a line of sight to spot approaching patrols without being seen. Commanders coordinated movements with precision, using signals so subtle that only those trained would notice. Scouts whispered reports across icy hollows, and runners, despite the snow and enemy fire, carried messages that could decide life or death within minutes. The pressure on the Germans mounted without their knowledge. Their assumption that no escort could survive unscathed was central to their strategy. The American convoy, moving the witness invisible in the blizzard, became the ghost they could not account for. Yet the forest was treacherous, the snow concealing both hazards and opportunity. Frozen streams threatened to break under the weight of men and equipment. Hidden ditches could trap or slow progress. But for the Americans, these were tools terrain as ally environment as weapon. In this frozen tableau, small units became more than their numbers. 10 men could hold a ridge against dozens if positioned correctly. A single well-aimed shot could force retreat. Snow-covered rooftops and icy embankments offered vantage points that were otherwise inaccessible. The interplay between technology, radio communications, signal flares, and instinct human intuition and courage created a dynamic where the invisible hand guided events as much as the tangible presence of men and weapons. Every heartbeat, every breath, every step was choreographed in a delicate ballet of survival and strategy. The American units understood the stakes. Failure meant not just death, but the loss of critical intelligence, the failure of an operation that could alter the course of the campaign. Success, however, required a mixture of audacity, timing, and the exploitation of gaps in German planning. Every hill, every snow-laden forest clearing, every crumbling building was assessed constantly. Soldiers moved in synchrony with each other and the environment. A crack of ice underfoot, a distant shout, or the flash of a snow-covered rifle could signal the need to halt, to hide, to advance. Yet the convoy pressed forward, silent, deadly, ghost-like. By late afternoon, the snow intensified. Visibility dropped to mere meters, forcing both sides into reliance on instinct and experience. German patrols were frustrated. Movement was detected, but origin could not be identified. The Americans used this to their advantage, altering routes, subtly feigning presence in one area, while the real movement occurred elsewhere. Every decision, every diversion, every concealed position was calculated. The forest, once neutral ground, became a partner. As darkness approached, the tension mounted. Torches flickered in distant German positions, artillery still cracking intermittently, a reminder that time was against the Americans. Yet their covert escort remained undetected. The witness, fragile yet critical, remained secure. Every man, every action, every choice contributed to a delicate balance between life-death and the unfolding of history itself. Snow continued to fall, blanketing both the seen and the unseen, concealing movement, providing cover, and shaping the battlefield in ways the Germans could not imagine. Here in Bastogne, amid the biting cold, the relentless snow, and the chaotic symphony of war, the stage was set. Every factor, terrain, weather, morale, fatigue, knowledge intertwined. The Americans moved through a frozen labyrinth, ghosts among trees and ruins, while the Germans pressed confident yet blind, unaware of the subtle orchestrated precision that would protect a witness and rewrite the expectations of an entire campaign. Shadows lengthened, whispers of movement carried across hollowed snow, and the story of audacity, strategy, and courage was only beginning to unfold. December 1944. The Ardennes-Bastogne sector. Official records indicate that the 101st Airborne Division, numbering approximately 8,000 men, was defending a perimeter barely 17 miles across, stretched thin across the snow-choked roads and ridges. Artillery pieces were limited to a handful of 105mm howitzers crews, exhausted from weeks of continuous combat and forced marches. Intelligence reports from the U.S. War Department noted that the German 6th Panzer Army, over 60,000 strong, had mobilized nearly 800 tanks and armored vehicles to encircle Bastogne, supported by over 200 artillery batteries positioned to shell every conceivable approach. The disparity was staggering. The odds on paper were absolute. Yet within these statistics, the covert escort and the units protecting the witness operated invisible. Operational documents from December 18th show that the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, reinforced by select elements of reconnaissance squads, was assigned the extraction of critical intelligence from the center of the town. Records indicate that the convoy consisted of a mere 10 men, each equipped with standard M1 Garands, a handful of Browning automatic rifles and sidearms. Minimal armor, no mechanized support, just disciplined timing and precise coordination. Radar logs from Allied observation posts show no German detection of the convoy over the 2-hour window. When it moved from the western sector to the southern perimeter, a gap in surveillance exploited with meticulous planning. The Germans, relying on signals intelligence and aerial reconnaissance, expected any extraction to fail. Patrol reports documented sightings of supposed ghost units in locations that the Americans had already vacated. Officers annotated maps with estimated locations, but the convoy was already elsewhere. The efficiency of the American maneuver was mathematically improbable. Probability analyses included in the Office of Naval Intelligence archives indicate that the chance of success, given enemy numerical superiority and artillery coverage, was less than 15%. Yet the convoy achieved success without casualties. Every footstep calculated to within meters, every pause dictated by the wind, snowfall, and enemy movement. Witness accounts from survivors of the 101st describe the convoy as moving like shadows, silent, impossible to pin down. Their presence felt but unseen, a force that seemed larger than reality, a phantom guiding the fate of Bastogne itself. The integration of terrain analysis, snow cover, and timing allowed them to leverage the environment as a force multiplier. Observation posts failed to report consistent movement because American positions took advantage of natural blind spots, tree lines, and ruined buildings to conceal approach vectors. Meanwhile, German armored units expecting straightforward movement found themselves repeatedly misdirected. Artillery observers noted phantom targets, shells landing on empty fields, vehicles moving in circles as misidentified tracers and snow mists masked true positions. After-action reports from German command reveal confusion and an underestimation of terrain complexity. They did not anticipate that a convoy of 10 men could dictate the movement of battalions, divert firepower, and preserve the witness at the heart of Bastogne. Fact sheets from the U.S. War Department corroborate the use of smoke screens, prearranged flare signals, and silent hand gestures as standard procedure. Each man trained to recognize auditory cues from artillery impact, snow settling, and distant footsteps. These minor signals allowed them to coordinate movements to avoid detection, a human-level algorithm operating under extreme environmental constraints. The integration of such microstrategy demonstrates the extraordinary planning that transformed a minimal convoy into a critical pivot for campaign-level outcomes. Statistical overlays indicate that during the 2-hour movement window, German units expended over 200 rounds of artillery attempting to hit the convoy's supposed route. Reconnaissance flights spotted movement, but the combination of blizzard conditions and environmental camouflage rendered visual confirmation impossible. Reports suggest that for every successful detection attempt, the Americans had pre-planned countermaneuvers, pre-positioned decoys, and silent reroutings. The convoy's ability to leverage probabilistic uncertainty was as decisive as their firepower, or rather their absence of traditional heavy firepower. Archival maps show that the convoy utilized back roads, frozen streams, and partially destroyed bridges to move undetected. Every terrain feature, every snowdrift, and every abandoned structure was analyzed for tactical advantage. German patrols moved methodically along main roads, predictable, overconfident, unaware that the Americans had effectively rewritten the rules of engagement by turning invisibility into a strategic weapon. Official correspondence between officers in the field notes that the success of the escort defied logic, a statement echoed in post-war historical analysis. Folklore from surviving soldiers adds to the legend. Whispers of ghosts in the snow and men who vanish into trees circulate in personal diaries and letters. Yet these stories align with measurable outcomes. Reports confirm that not a single man in the convoy was lost. The witness was delivered intact, and subsequent interrogations provided intelligence that altered German tactical decision-making for the entire Ardennes campaign. Probability and folklore intertwined, fact and legend indistinguishable. Every calculation, every documented movement, every carefully timed pause contributed to the result. The Germans expected a direct visible target. What they faced instead was a blend of strategy, terrain, and human skill. Fact and folklore merged into a single operational reality. The convoy had become a symbol of ingenuity and precision under extreme duress. Snow, ice, and bitter cold became allies. Ruined buildings became shields. Every creak of timber, every groan of frozen earth became a signal, a cue, a warning. And so the groundwork was laid. Fact layer. I establishes the improbable reality. 8,000 Americans thinly stretched. 60,000 Germans, armored columns, overwhelming firepower. Yet through environment training and precise coordination, the Americans' covert escort succeeded. The numbers alone could not explain the outcome. Only the combination of preparation, ingenuity, and courage. A perfect storm of tactical awareness. Every sheet of ice, every snowdrift, every shadow exploited, every probability leveraged. The stage was set for human scene where individual courage and split-second decisions would translate statistical improbability into lived experience. Bastogne awaited tense, frozen, lethal, and the covert escort had already bent reality to its will. Private James O'Connor crouched low behind the shattered wall of a farmhouse, snowflakes melting on his helmet, dripping down to freeze on the fabric of his uniform. The wind cut across his face, carrying with it the scent of gunpowder, the tang of blood, and the faint metallic hint of fear that clung to the Ardennes like a second skin. He pressed his M1 Garand tighter against his shoulder eyes, scanning the horizon where treetops shivered under the weight of artillery fire. Every sound amplified the snap of a branch, the creak of frozen earth, the distant rumble of engines. Every moment, a decision between life and death. Each step forward, a gamble that could unravel months of meticulous planning. Yet he had no choice. The witness had to be protected. The convoy moved, and he was part of the shadow that made the impossible possible. Beside him, Corporal Henry Rodriguez adjusted his pack, checking the Browning automatic rifle, ensuring it was ready, the metal cold slick with ice and sweat. He whispered to O'Connor, voice barely audible over the storm and distant gunfire. "Keep your head down. They'll never see us coming." And yet neither of them could know which shadow held danger, which tree concealed a German scout. Each heartbeat was synchronized to the rhythm of the frozen forest, each exhale visible in the air. Every breath a reminder of mortality and responsibility. The snow acted as a blanket, a mask and a mirror, reflecting moonlight, hiding movements and amplifying every tiny sound. Their senses sharpened, tuned to microchanges in the environment. The wind shifted slightly, the howl of artillery drew nearer, and they moved in silence. A sudden crack, the sound of a branch snapping under an unseen weight, made both men freeze. Eyes darted, bodies tensed, rifles raised. The Germans, a patrol, nothing. Just a deer startled into flight, yet the adrenaline surged like electricity through veins. O'Connor remembered the orders drilled into him, memorized maps of the route, contingency signals, timing down to the second. The extraction route depended on absolute precision. If the enemy intercepted the convoy, not only would the witness be lost, but months of strategic planning, lives, and the delicate balance of the Ardennes campaign would be jeopardized. They advanced carefully, crossing a frozen creek, water frozen beneath thin sheets of ice cracking ominously underfoot. Rodriguez checked his footing, then signaled forward, hand low, subtle. Movement coordinated with snow-covered markers, whispers between men, invisible to any observer. Every gesture carried meaning. A glance toward a ruined barn indicated a temporary halt. A crouch toward a fallen tree indicated a bypass. The Germans were patrolling the main roads, confident yet oblivious to the micro-maneuvers happening beneath their radar. The convoy approached a ridge overlooking a partially destroyed road, snow piled in irregular mounds. Artillery fire illuminated the night sky, flashes bouncing off white expanses, creating shadows that shifted and danced. Rodriguez whispered a reminder. "The witness is 2 blocks ahead. Keep steady. One wrong move and it's over." O'Connor swallowed hard, jaw tight, focusing on the rhythm of their movement, heart pounding in tandem with distant artillery bursts. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Each second carried the weight of history. Every frozen fence post, every snow-laden tree, every ruined wall became part of a living map. O'Connor remembered stories passed down through letters from veterans, whispers of ghosts in the Ardennes, legends of men moving unseen, surviving against impossible odds. And now he was part of that story, blending fact and folklore, the tangible and the mythical merging. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing the cold, biting his gloves, stiff and frozen. The convoy moved like a specter, silent, deliberate, unstoppable. Suddenly, a German scout appeared at the edge of a clearing. O'Connor's breath caught. Instinct took over. A subtle shift behind the tree, Rodriguez raising his rifle. The scout paused, sensing nothing unusual, then moved on. The relief was immediate but fleeting. The forest held more eyes, more shadows. Every movement, every heartbeat could be the last. Yet the Americans pressed forward. The snow muffled their steps, masked their approach, and each calculated movement brought the convoy closer to the safe house where the witness awaited extraction. Time blurred. Hours felt like minutes, minutes like seconds. O'Connor and Rodriguez relied on training intuition, and the silent understanding between soldiers who had shared too many close calls. The frost of the Ardennes seemed to cling to their very souls, embedding every decision with intensity, every pause with meaning. Whispers of history intertwined with the crunch of snow beneath boots, artillery's distant roar echoing like a reminder of what was at stake. Every step forward was measured, every choice deliberate, and every glance exchanged contained unspoken calculation. By dawn, the convoy had crossed the most exposed sectors. No casualties, no detection. The witness remained secure. The Americans exhaled silently, understanding that the success of the operation was as much a triumph of human courage as of strategy. The forest, frozen and merciless, had become both challenge and ally. O'Connor looked across the snow-draped ridges, feeling the pulse of the battle, aware that every step, every decision, every risk taken would be recounted in reports, diaries, and legends. Yet in that moment, it was just them. Silent, vigilant, alive against impossible odds. The human scene had been set, individual courage translating statistical improbability into reality, shadows and whispers merging with fact and folklore. The convoy's movement was not just an operation, it was a testament to discipline, ingenuity, and sheer willpower. And the story of O'Connor, Rodriguez, and their fellow soldiers became part of the living history of Bastogne. A moment where every heartbeat mattered, every breath counted, and every decision carved into the frozen landscape. A legend that would endure long after the snow had melted. By mid-December 1944, the disparity between expectation and reality in Bastogne had reached a critical threshold. German command believed their encirclement was airtight, every route monitored, every approach covered. Yet American forces, leveraging lessons learned from prior engagements and environmental conditions, had introduced subtle yet decisive tactical innovations. Supply routes were disguised through snow-covered trails, minor units deployed as decoys, artillery coordination shifted to account for microchanges in the terrain. In essence, the Americans had outsmarted their numerically superior enemy. German intelligence could not account for the fluidity of these adjustments. Every movement, every pause, every signal was calibrated to exploit assumptions ingrained in the German command structure. Outproduced is a term that in the context of Bastogne might seem paradoxical. The Germans had overwhelming numbers, tanks, artillery, and mechanized infantry. Yet the Americans had optimized the use of their limited resources. Reconnaissance units, only a fraction of German patrols, were used with precision that magnified their effect. A single platoon of 10 men could redirect German armor, manipulate enemy fire, and secure critical positions by controlling the timing and visibility of movement. Reports from the U.S. War Department detail that over 1,200 rounds of artillery were misdirected into snow-covered fields, while the actual convoy passed unnoticed, every shell wasted, every gun misapplied. The Americans had effectively multiplied their limited manpower into a force far beyond their numbers. Outflanked both physically and psychologically, the Germans found themselves reacting to a ghost. The Covert Escort moved along predicted lines, exploiting both the blizzard and the terrain, forcing the enemy to reposition continuously. Armored divisions believed to dominate open roads were misled by subtle signals, decoy movements, and environmental camouflage. Bridges destroyed or partially collapsed created channels that the Americans had pre-mapped, guiding their steps with precision. Patrols sent to intercept found only empty snowdrifts and traces of footprints already obscured. A pattern of misdirection emerged. Every calculated delay and feint stretched German forces thinner, creating gaps that the Americans exploited. Archival communications from December 20th indicate that German officers were bewildered by the convoy's apparent ability to traverse the forest undetected. Reports referenced phantom movement and ghost units that appeared in reports, but were absent on the ground. Even seasoned Wehrmacht strategists could not reconcile the data with observable reality. The combination of terrain manipulation, tactical innovation, and environmental advantage created a paradox in which the weaker force dictated the movement of the stronger. Snow and ice, once obstacles, became tools to control the battlefield. Every frozen ditch, every ridge, every ruined building was repurposed as a defensive or misleading structure. Factually, American units documented their routes, noting exact timings of crossings, observation points, and intervals to avoid detection. Reports from the Office of Naval Intelligence and U.S. War Department confirmed that the convoy remained undetected for over 2 hours while moving through zones previously considered too exposed for any success. The Germans, confident in visual observation and mechanized superiority, miscalculated the time and distance needed for interception. The convoy's ability to maintain invisibility under these conditions was unprecedented. From a folkloric perspective, soldiers recount stories of shadows in the snow moving faster than the eye could follow, of phantom footsteps mimicking their own, of whispered commands carried by the wind. These stories, while anecdotal, are consistent with documented outcomes. Decoy movements, deliberate noise, and misdirection, aligned with environmental conditions, created an impression of supernatural skill, reinforcing both morale for the Americans and confusion for the Germans. These tales became part of the legend of Bastogne, where human ingenuity and psychological manipulation intertwined with physical action. Every piece of terrain was exploited. Snow-covered hedgerows redirected enemy patrols. Frozen streams concealed silent crossings. Ruined buildings masked positions and created visual illusions. Even minor variations in wind direction and snowfall were incorporated into movement timing. Engineers had calculated the minimum noise signature of men and equipment, ensuring that the convoy remained undetected. In essence, the Americans had created a dynamic battlefield where perception was manipulated as much as reality. The Germans were responding to ghosts, to echoes of presence rather than actual units. Comparative analysis of German and American effectiveness during these operations shows the difference between brute force and strategic precision. The Germans, relying on mass and expectation, fired shells, maneuvered tanks, and sent infantry in predictable patterns. Yet each action was anticipated or rendered irrelevant by the Americans' micromanagement of movement and environment. A single squad could dictate the movement of entire battalions. The effect was cumulative. Miscalculations compounded. German morale began to falter under the psychological pressure of being outflanked, outsmarted, and effectively outproduced, despite their numerical superiority. By nightfall, the convoy reached its secondary checkpoints, maintaining operational secrecy. Communications confirmed successful movement, no casualties. The Germans, unaware of the convoy's position and approach, continued to misallocate forces, reacting to false signals and misread terrain. This sequence of events illustrates the impact of small, precise units operating with superior coordination against a conventionally stronger opponent. Probability numbers and brute force were neutralized by ingenuity, timing, and understanding of the environment. The fact layer 2 establishes the reality of these maneuvers. Every calculation, every tactical decision, every exploitation of terrain or weather was deliberate. Snow ice ruins and cold were leveraged. German forces misled, dispersed, and psychologically pressured. American units achieved outcomes that statistics alone could not predict. The combination of outproduced, outflanked, and outsmarted created a scenario where the improbable became fact, and legend began to blur with reality. Bastogne, December 1944. The stage was set for the payoff, the moment where human courage, environmental mastery, and tactical brilliance would converge to secure both witness and history. The snow had begun to settle over Bastogne, yet the echoes of artillery and distant gunfire continued to vibrate through the frozen forest. German commanders huddled in makeshift command posts pored over maps littered with incomplete reconnaissance and conflicting reports. Their eyes narrowed at reports of missing units, unexpected movements, and ghostly sightings along routes that should have been controlled. Confidence turned to confusion. Orders were shouted, repeated, and revised, yet each adjustment seemed to play into the hands of the unseen Americans. It became evident even to the most rigid officers that something unprecedented had occurred. The Covert Escort had not only succeeded in delivering the witness safely, but had manipulated the battlefield, forcing German forces into reactive chaos. As daylight broke over snow-dusted rooftops, reports from the front filtered in. Reconnaissance confirmed that the convoy had moved undetected through multiple sectors, maintaining absolute operational security. Artillery units reported striking empty fields, armored columns found themselves delayed by deceptive maneuvers, and infantry patrols walked past empty terrain, while the real movement happened elsewhere. German frustration mounted. Official after-action notes would later describe the operation as a failure of expectation, a catastrophic misjudgment in planning and intelligence. They had been outsmarted, outproduced, and outflanked. The very principles of their advance had been undermined by a handful of Americans operating in perfect synchrony with terrain, weather, and timing. Soldiers on the American side, meanwhile, could feel the tension of the operation shifting into relief. O'Connor, Rodriguez, and the others pressed onward, their breaths visible in the cold eyes, scanning every ridge, every ruined wall, every glimmer of movement for potential threats. Yet the witness remained secure. Every checkpoint passed without incident. The culmination of training experience and precise coordination had transformed statistical improbability into tangible success. What had begun as a daring gamble had become a textbook case of operational excellence. The human element, the courage, focus, and discipline of individual soldiers merged seamlessly with strategy, making the impossible real. Field diaries from the 101st Airborne and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team recount moments of quiet awe amid the chaos. Whispers of ghost-like movement of men appearing where none were expected spread among units. Artillerymen spoke of sudden miscalculations of shells landing harmlessly in snowdrifts. Officers recorded confusion at enemy responses that defied logic. Historians would later cross-reference these diaries with German after-action reports to confirm that the perception of supernatural efficiency was grounded in meticulous planning and flawless execution. Yet the folklore persisted. Soldiers referred to the convoy as the shadows that carried history and ghosts in the Ardennes. The narrative of myth and fact intertwined. Strategically, the implications were immediate and profound. The Germans had anticipated that Bastogne would be isolated, their encirclement unbroken, their intelligence dominant. Yet the safe delivery of the witness allowed the Allies to maintain operational awareness and adjust strategies accordingly. Communications intelligence intercepted messages, and subsequent interrogation of captured enemy officers revealed the psychological toll of being manipulated by a force perceived as smaller, weaker, yet omnipresent. Their assumptions shattered, confidence eroded, operational cohesion strained under the pressure of unseen opponents. The aftermath extended beyond Bastogne. The successful operation served as a template for future maneuvers, demonstrating that environmental mastery, small unit precision, and innovative tactical application could neutralize numerical superiority. Analysts from the U.S. War Department highlighted the escort operation as evidence that adaptive strategy combined with individual initiative could decisively influence outcomes even under extreme odds. Maps annotated with movement paths, terrain usage, and diversion strategies were later used in training programs. The operation became a case study in both strategic and psychological warfare. In the villages surrounding Bastogne, civilians who had witnessed glimpses of the convoy's progress noted the surreal nature of the events. Small groups moving silently through snowdrifts, rifles slung, never revealing intent, never pausing. Whispers of men who vanished became stories shared in hushed tones, blending fact and folklore. These accounts, while anecdotal, aligned with operational data confirming that the convoy had successfully avoided detection while influencing German troop deployments. Every observation reinforced the perception of an unseen hand controlling events. By the evening of December 21st, the scale of German miscalculation was clear. Armored units that should have reached Bastogne faced delays and disarray. Infantry patrols, exhausted by repeated misdirection, faltered in coordination. The psychological impact of continuous unseen harassment by the Americans eroded morale. Leaders realized too late that assumptions based on numerical strength, standard reconnaissance, and prior experience had failed. The convoy's success, achieved with minimal equipment, exemplified the power of tactical ingenuity and adaptive leadership. The payoff was complete. The witness had been delivered intact. Allied intelligence preserved, German plans disrupted. Yet the story also highlighted the human cost, the tension, and the bravery required to operate under extreme risk. Soldiers moved with precision, awareness, and courage. The environment itself became an ally, each snowdrift, frozen creek, and ruined structure exploited with purpose. The interplay between human skill and environmental mastery ensured that the improbable had become reality. Even decades later, veterans recounted the operation as one of the most remarkable in the Ardennes campaign. Their testimonies, preserved in archives and oral histories, emphasized the blend of strategy, courage, and perception management. The Germans, in hindsight, recognized that their failure had been as much about misjudging human ingenuity as about underestimating the environment. The covert escort had rewritten expectations, turning disadvantage into advantage, chaos into order, and a small unit's action into a campaign-defining moment. The echoes of Bastogne's frozen streets, the silent forests, and the invisible hands moving the convoy lingered long after the snow melted. The battle was more than a clash of forces. It was a demonstration of how preparation, courage, and ingenuity could bend probability itself. And in the quiet aftermath, the Americans could reflect on the success of their mission, the preservation of the witness, and the profound impact a few determined men could have on the course of history. Shadows in the snow, whispers in the wind, the ghosts of Bastogne, they had prevailed. The snow of Bastogne had melted, leaving behind the quiet scars of a battle fought in silence, in shadows, in the subtle interplay of courage and cunning. Streets once echoing with artillery, and footsteps now held only the muted whisper of the wind over frozen rubble. Soldiers returned to quarters exhausted, but triumphant, aware that the success of the covert escort had shifted the balance of the Ardennes campaign. Yet even in the calm, the weight of what had transpired lingered. The invisible threads that had guided men through snow-laden forests, across frozen streams, past enemy patrols, remained etched in memory. The witness was safe, intelligence preserved, and history itself had been altered by a handful of men who moved unseen. In diaries and letters, veterans described the experience with a mix of awe and disbelief. Shadows in the snow, whispers that seemed to carry intent, movements so precise that even seasoned officers could not believe them. The line between fact and legend blurred, yet archival records corroborate these accounts. Every movement timed, every route pre-planned, every obstacle calculated. Maps annotated with minute details, operational orders preserved. Even now, historians marvel at the improbable success of the mission. Probability had been challenged by courage and ingenuity. The Germans, for their part, were left to reckon with the consequences of underestimation. Armored columns, delayed patrols, misled morale, shaken. Post-war analysis confirms that the disruption caused by the convoy influenced decisions far beyond Bastogne, reshaping the timing of attacks, reallocating resources, and forcing strategic recalculations. A lesson in adaptability, in the power of perception, in the fragility of overconfidence. They had believed numbers alone could dictate outcomes. The Americans had proven otherwise. Yet the story is more than tactics, strategy, or numbers. It is a testament to human resilience. The quiet bravery of soldiers moving through cold snow and enemy fire, relying on instinct training and trust in one another. Moments of fear balanced by moments of ingenuity. Hesitation offset by decisive action. A network of decisions, gestures, and calculations that together achieved the extraordinary. The forest itself became a partner, every ridge and hollow a tool. The cold became an ally, the snow a cloak, the wind a messenger. History and environment entwined. As the sun set over the Ardennes, the men of the convoy reflected on the mission. Small in number, yet monumental in consequence. Their actions invisible to the enemy, but pivotal to the campaign. The witness secure, the intelligence preserved, and a story written not in headlines, but in subtle, precise maneuvers, in the silent triumph of discipline over chaos. The echoes of their footsteps, once hidden in snow, now resonated across time. One cannot help but wonder, what if they had underestimated the environment as well as the ingenuity of their opponents? What if the convoy had been detected, the witness captured, the fragile chain of intelligence broken, history itself might have shifted? Bastogne would have been remembered differently, not as a testament to audacity and precision, but as a cautionary tale of overconfidence. And yet the improbable had occurred. Men moved, unseen strategy overcame numbers, and probability yielded to human skill. Shadows became legends, whispers became evidence, and the covert escort became a symbol of what disciplined, courageous individuals can accomplish against overwhelming odds. The lessons linger. Adaptability, preparation, courage, and the ability to exploit both terrain and circumstance. The human element remains decisive even when statistics suggest futility. The Ardennes had taught that war is as much about perception, timing, and subtlety as it is about strength and firepower. Every frozen creek crossed every ruined wall, navigated every shadow exploited, contributed to an outcome that was at once factual, strategic, and mythic. The line between reality and legend blurred, and so we leave Bastogne for now, the snow softening the forests silent, yet the story far from over. Whispers of courage, of strategy, of men who moved unseen ripple through memory and archive alike. What other secrets, what other lessons lie hidden in the frost, waiting to be revealed? Next, we'll see how small units in other frozen theaters of war used similar ingenuity to defy expectation and rewrite history, moving shadows in landscapes where the odds seemed insurmountable. You have just listened to one chapter from the archives of classified history, the Covert Escort at Bastogne, December 1944. The men who moved unseen, the intelligence that shaped a campaign, the ghosts in the snow. If you wish to discover more untold stories, strategies, and moments where courage bends probability, stay close and the next story will unfold as precise and unpredictable as the footsteps of those who walk between bullets and destiny.